can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh Lord, and I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord.
So when it comes to any kind of lesson, especially in the beginning of the year, I really try to incorporate a group lesson like this in the beginning to try and create a kind of bond between the classes to form some kind of relationship between everybody, you know, to the point where they're comfortable with each other and they're okay with interacting with one another. So, I mean, even though it's the beginning of the year, they haven't really interacted with each other too much. They haven't really met each other. They don't really understand each other just yet. So, I think one of the reasons why I chose the domain of on the Danielson framework, where it's 2A, with creating the environment of respect and environment of rapport, is because one thing that I've learned so far at Lakeside is just how important relationship is and how far it goes with any kind of kid. If a strong relationship is present, the amount of success and the amount of work that a kid does is just, it goes so far. The success, the learning, it's going to rise. The correlation is it's positive. It's strong. I mean, it's the most positive thing I've seen before. So I thought that if I could create some sort of group activity where the kids are, where the kids are, working together with one another, but also counting on each other to counting on each other to get the correct steps, so that they can actually work off of one another and build off of that problem and be able to count on each other and make sure that they're all holding each other accountable. But I think that by this action, you can get some serious relationships built. And it's a good way to build that foundation so that as the school year goes on, they can feel more and more comfortable with each other. Of course, some students are going to struggle. And this is where I thought that, since it's Lakeside and we got such a broad spectrum of intelligence levels in our classes, it's a part where I think that the advanced students, or the kids who are, really, really understanding this topic, could really step up and branch out and help those struggling students out. And I feel like that's one of the challenges that I meet here at Lakeside. It's the fact that, I have such a hard time creating these rigorous activities, making activities creative enough to the point where I can hit each of these kids' thinking standards and get all students to think outside the box. It's probably every teacher's challenge as well. I think that the brain breaks are a great tool to settle the class down, no matter what the intelligence spectrum is, especially in a math class. With my strengths, going through the strengths test and stuff that we did earlier in the year with the PLP in-service workshops, I got the strength of being an achiever and a competitor. And I think that just overall just comes from my overall, spirit, my mindset of being a competitor since I was a kid. And it's probably just basically because being athletics, playing basketball, playing baseball, being outside with the kids in the neighborhood playing football. I've been a competitor my entire life. And I like to think that my instruction resembles that of a coach. I do coach at the high school level, coaching at basketball, one of the school districts down the road. I just really want to make my lessons meaningful, keep my students engaged, just like, when I'm on the basketball court, making sure my guys know what they're doing, make sure that they're engaged as well. Sometimes just by getting the students out of their chairs can even be a huge factor of keeping them engaged. And I feel like, it wakes the students up, of course. More importantly, it gets them the chance to see that, learning and understanding material is not just paper and pencil. It's just the fact that they can get up and try different things. And it's a good way for the students to retain the material in a bunch of different ways, depending on the style of the learner, their auditory, tactile, visual. We all know how many different kinds of learners there are. With my specific lesson that I chose, there were definitely a couple of red flags that would come up. The opportunities students could learn from a different school. Now, it is Lakeside, so we're getting kids from, different school districts from all over the counties, whether it's Montgomery, Philadelphia County, Bucks County, and every teacher teaches in a different way. My specific lesson was on solving multi-step equations. There's a couple different ways that I've seen when it comes to teaching and showing the correct modeling and the tools that teachers show to teach these kids or our students how to solve these multi-step equations. I think by having the guided notes for each problem in the fashion I do, I think it's a really good way for guided notes to differentiate instruction, so that makes sure all students know how to do the problem the correct way that I would like for them to do it. Now, I always use the old-fashioned I do, we do, then you do. So it's showing me that there's a lot of scaffolding going on, that, they're seeing how I do it, we do it together, and eventually I leave them off on their own. And I like to tell the kids that, I'm not going to throw you out in the ocean or push you in the pool if you don't know how to swim. Now, this is where it came to, after we do all the I do, we do, you do stuff, I usually can go into some guided practice problems where they're doing them on their own. I think this is where I can really gauge if the class is ready or not. And that's when I'll move into the review and practice. Now, with my specific lesson, my PLP, I chose my Hattie research topic was concept mapping. Now, I know concept mapping with mathematics is a little bit different. It's more so for the science, history, maybe English classes that we saw through doing some research, doing the group activities and the in-service days. I really thought it was a good idea for me to, use this for this specific type of lesson, because it can get the kids to, think outside a little bit think outside the box a little bit, I should say, and, take a different approach for mathematics. So for my concept map, what I would do was I'd take a huge piece of construction paper, and I would put, assuming that now my class when I did, there was 5 kids in class, so I had 5 problems. I had a problem for each kid. So each kid would start out on their problem on that big piece of construction paper, and from there, that would be their initial problem to start with. So they would, circle it, that probe or that, orb of that big piece of that concept map, and then they would go on and do the first step of that problem, whether it's distributing, whether it's combining like terms, and these are terms that we would talk about in class during that day, so that we could, show them the correct steps on how to solve. After that step, they would connect the line from the first circle to the initial problem down to that first step, and on that line is where they would explain, their work or explain the steps that they did in order to show how they got from that first piece of their initial problem into the second problem, or the second step, I should say. And I think that, connecting the 2 circles with that line is a big piece of the concept map. In other subject areas, it's a little bit different, but I feel like with math, by having them explain their work, I think is also an awesome way to review for Keystone problems. When the Keystone exams come in May, the kids have to tackle those constructive response questions, and, a lot of times kids struggle when it comes to explaining their work. So I think using that concept map is another awesome way to, make sure that kids are prepared for those Keystone exams and make sure that they feel comfortable explaining their work. Now, they move on, so they do that first step, they explain. Now what's going to happen is they will rotate that paper, or they will, switch spots, so they will move on to the next problem. So the kid that's next to them have started that problem, they will move to that problem, and everybody else will say, clockwise. And they'll do that next step. Same thing, same process occurs. They solve this problem, they draw the line, and they explain their work. And eventually, the whole point is to get each step and step and step solved, have a bunch of explanations to the point where we get the variable solved for, whether it's, x equals 2, 5, whatever, and each kid can see that they built off of one another, they supported each other, and they helped each other out, and together they tackled all 5 of those problems. Now, I think that's where building that environment of respect and rapport where, it's starting them out early, where they feel comfortable, where they know that they can trust one another. I think that trust goes a long way. If the kid can trust the kid to the left or to the right of them, and they know that they're not going to screw up their problem, then, it goes a long way. Whether it comes to trusting them that they can help them on an assignment problem, or trusting them that they can, ask them for the homework, or any kind of work that they missed if they were out for a day or an extended amount of days. And I think that this is a good way, at least to start the class out in the beginning of the year, especially with this concept, because it's a pretty basic Algebra 1 concept. All right, so here's a a copy of the guide notes that I have with my class now. Every single kid would get a copy of this, and everybody would be following along. We go through the steps, and after doing our warm-up problem, we go through a bell ringer just to get everybody on the same page. Spark some prior recognition from the day before with one-step or two-step equations. We'd move into our multi-step equations. Now, here's a good example of one of the problems that we'd have. This is the distributive property. So this left side is more of like the I do, like we do stage. And the YT is more, I like to joke with the kids and say it's something funny, but it stands for your turn. So when the kids see YT4 or something else, they'll know it's their opportunity to go through the problem themselves. And that's when I'd be going through the class, circulating, checking for understanding, and so on. So I'd be going through the class. I'd tell them, what's my first step here? What do I have to do with the 3 there? Assuming everybody would go on, say you have to distribute that 3. So I'd rewrite the problem here for the kids. Plus 3x plus 12 equals 28. Now I like to have this word column so the kids are understanding, getting that common practice of the keystones and the constructor response questions. So we'd say we use distributive property there. All right. Next, I'd get a gauge from the class. Say, okay, what's my next step? Pretend I'm your pet goldfish. Pretend I'm your pet dog. Pretend somebody, a family member that doesn't know anything or forgot about math. What's my next step? Hopefully, I get a kid or a few kids that raise their hand. If nobody answers, I'll do a little bit of blind questions. Say, Johnny, what's my next step? What do you think I got to do? There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see what you think. Hopefully, he's paying his attention in class before, and he sees that we need to combine like terms. So we know that 5x plus 3x is going to give us 8x. So you still have 8x plus 12 equals 28. And I would say right here, combined like terms. Okay? Now, this is where I was talking about before, where I've seen some methods of, different teachers, different teaching styles that teach multi-step equations or solving linear equations in general a little bit different. Now, the traditional way that I've seen it, that I learned it personally, is that, my next step is I know that I have to subtract 12 from both sides. So I've seen the traditional way is to do minus 12, minus 12. So I tell kids, what's the inverse of plus 12? They all say, we subtract, or minus 12 from both sides. And you've seen the whole minus 12. Sometimes we'll see a teacher draw a line down there. That's how I do it. This is what I was talking about in my hopefully there's not any red flags, but there's some kids who solve it a little bit differently. All right? I've seen sometimes, I think the Common Core maybe state this, that we know that we have to do the opposite of positive 12. We subtract 12, but we write it like this. 8x plus 12 minus 12 equals 28 minus 12. And then we solve and simplify from there. So we end up with 8x equals 28 minus 12 is 16. And then we know that we have to divide by 8. I'd say, what's the inverse? What's my next step? Do a little blind question, gauge the room. Divide by 8 on both sides. And we would get x equals 2. Now look, I skipped a few steps. I made a mistake. I moved too fast. All right, and that's one of the things that I think that as a teacher I need to do a better job of. I need to slow down, gauge the class a little bit better, and see what I have to do. All right, so right here I would write subtract 12, and hopefully there's a kid who can stop me in class and say, yo, Pat, or Mr. Pat, you're moving too fast for me, slow down, please. Right here, divide by 8, and then right here, all right, this is where I get a lot of kids who will make mistakes. You're supposed to check your work. And I'll go through the process. We'll say, check. I don't have it required here, but I will go through it on a separate board. If a kid's confused, I'll make sure I show it to them on my own time or in some time in small group instruction. All right, now, I'd ask, are there any questions? Does everybody understand? Do I need to go over it again? Is there any pieces here in my words that I threw you off on or that I lost you on? If the class is good, I'd say the ones that are okay with no questions, please move on to your turn 4. And I give them a few minutes to get that done. And then the kids who do need some help, I'll go to them individually, a little bit of one-on-one instruction. If there's more than one kid, I'll maybe pull them to the back, maybe to the small table over here, and we do some small group instruction.
Test your might. Test your might. Test your might.
So here's the beginning of the concept map that I was, thinking about doing. I got, hopefully 4 kids are in class. If there's a bigger group, I can maybe, split up the kids into different groups around the class. But for now, I got 4 different problems in the red, green, orange, and the pink. Now notice how, this one's straight side, this one's going that way, this one's upside down, and that one's the other side. So it's got 4 kids facing different directions. Now, the whole object is that, once this person goes down, makes their adjustments or makes their first step, draws a line to it, then we'll take this paper, all right, we'll take this and hopefully eventually rotate it to the point where it looks like this. Now the person who had the red problem now has the pink problem. The person who has the green problem or the person who had the red problem goes to, or the person who had the red problem goes to the pink, and everybody rotates accordingly. So the point where we get down to the bottom where, we finish the problem, everything is finished out, and it looks we have our final product. Everybody worked as a team. Hopefully eventually they got to their original problem. Hopefully they finished on their original problem, and then we have our concept map. Okay, so this would be, our finished product here, assuming that all 4 students work together collectively, help each other out. We got a bunch of different pieces of this concept map. We've got our first probe in the middle here, which says multi-step equations, which is our broader topic. After doing research with concept maps, you always start with a broader topic, and you get more and more specific as you go down. So let's zoom in here a little bit. All right, here's our multi-step equations. Our first in the red, different steps going down until we get our final answer. The students didn't check. Here's our purple, going down. Here's our orange right here, going up. Sorry for it being upside down. And here's our green. All right, from a distance, that's some good work right there. So assuming that group activity kind of took up a meat of the time. Now, granted, we only have 40-some minutes, 42 minutes to do a typical lesson here. I would always like to stop the class in the last, 2 minutes or so and try and get a little bit of a review, some kind of closure, normally a ticket out or, an exit ticket, as we like to say. It'd be 2 questions, and it'd be on their notes. Now, I know there's a lot that's going on in this notes sheet, so we probably want to get through a lot of it, so I'd branch it up in different portions here. But I'd either tell them, let's do A for our ticket out, saying describe how to clear fractions from an equation. That's something, that would be talked about in our lesson. Or maybe instead of doing A, maybe we did it on another day, we do B here, where it says, summarize the process of checking a solution. And like I said earlier, I'd show the kids how it's a skill that we talked about, and it's just a way for me to check understanding before they leave, and so that we can go in tomorrow, when I go through their binders or, look at their notes, I can check for understanding and see which kids are understanding the concepts and which kids are not, and see if we need to go over this information or not. And then I have, their homework sheet. It would look something like this. There's our homework right here, so I'd give them that. Or, if they have a few minutes and we get through it, I'd give them to them early. So there's always, those 2 or 3 kids that finish their speed demons, and they finish everything pretty simple, pretty easy. And, there's, a little bit more advanced than some of the other kids. I give them their homework a lot earlier, so they're just not sitting there twiddling their thumbs, give them opportunities to get their nose into something, or, screwing around and getting themselves, sent out of class for a behavior reason. So, homework, just review, go over the objective that we did that day, and we'll wrap up the lesson.